Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of dense sources and, well, we try to extract the core knowledge you need.
And today we're tackling an absolute classic, a really powerful work.
We're doing a deep dive into excerpts from Noam Chomsky's Hegemony or Survival, America's Quest for Global Dominance.
And this material is, it's intense. It's an examination of how these policies aimed at total global control create this profound tension.
A tension between what, exactly?
Between the goals of a governing elite and, the fundamental need for human survival, both here and, of course, around the world.
Okay, so let's just jump right into that. The title itself, Hegemony or Survival, that's basically a whole mission statement, isn't it?
It is. It sets up this central, really high-stakes conflict from the first page.
The idea that this quest for global dominance, it has to rely on force. And the source argues that this reliance on force, that's the one thing that puts global survival at risk.
Absolutely. The tension is baked right in. And I think what provides the initial, shock factor is just how extreme the policy was. The one declared by figures like Cheney and Rumsfeld.
It was explicit.
Very. The source points out that they declared a policy aimed at permanent global hegemony.
Permanent, not just temporary advantage.
Permanent.
Yeah.
And backed by unilateral military force whenever it was deemed necessary. They weren't hiding the ball. They were putting the world on notice.
That's a staggering premise to start with. But of course, before you can do that abroad, you need to justify it at home.
You do.
So what's the fundamental assumption that this whole imperial strategy is built on?
Well, it's what Chomsky calls the ideological veil. You might know it as Wilsonian idealism.
Right.
The core assumption, and this is one that's considered, unnecessary to formulate because everyone in power just accepts it, is this: we, the leadership, are good.
Fundamentally noble, even.
Exactly. So therefore, no matter how brutal our actions might seem, our intentions are always righteous.
It's a self-sealing logic. If we're inherently good, our interventions must also be good. Wilson talked about America's elevated ideals, how they were dedicated to stability and righteousness.
He did. But the source doesn't let that noble intent just stand there on its own.
No, it brings in the historical skepticism pretty fast.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the most important takeaways from this whole deep dive. It reminds you that this kind of rhetoric, this noble talk, it's predictable.
And it should be distrusted.
Immediately.
You're talking about the parallel with John Stuart Mill in the 19th century.
Yes. Mill defended Britain when its empire was at its height. He called it a novelty in the world, claiming it only acted in the service of others.
But at the exact moment he was writing that,
Britain was committing, and I'm quoting here, some of the worst crimes of its imperial reign. So the insight is that claiming you have noble intent, it carries no information. It tells you nothing.
it's the first camouflage for empire.
That's it exactly.
A crucial synthesis. So if you can't trust the external rhetoric, you have to look at the internal management. How does that control shift inward to the domestic population?
Well, it connects that quest for global power directly to the need for the public to be passive.
Okay.
Going all the way back to the 17th century English Revolution, the main concern of the powerful has been controlling the general population. Alexander Hamilton had that famous term for the public.
The great beast.
The great beast. And the goal, according to the source, is to make sure that beast does not stray from its proper confines.
And the specific tool for keeping the beast confined is, of course, the manufacture of consent.
A term everyone knows, but maybe not the context. It comes from progressive thinkers like Walter Lippmann, who was, he was directly inspired by the propaganda success of Britain's Ministry of Information.
And Wilson's Committee on Public Information during World War I?
Critically, yes. They saw how these centralized state efforts could, effectively manage public opinion on a massive scale.
So Lippmann saw that wartime success and basically said, hey, we need to apply this to democracy itself.
Pretty much. He argued that the public must be put in its place. He felt common interests very largely elude public opinion entirely, and so they needed to be managed by a specialized class.
That's the foundational idea then. Democracy is too important for the people, so their consent needs to be manufactured.
To align with elite interests, yes.
And that framework, it really helps you understand the critique of shrinking the democratic arena. If your goal is just management, you have to limit access to actual power.
You have to. Chomsky points out that the neoliberal economic policies of the 30 years before this book were in fact designed specifically to restrict that public arena.
Oh, so?
The practical effect was moving fundamental decision-making out of, say, elected government bodies and into what he calls largely unaccountable private tyrannies.
So corporate boardrooms, financial institutions.
The power shifts from the public sphere right into private hands. And what that leaves you with is political campaigns that the source just sharply calls political kabuki.
Political theater.
Precisely. Because if all the key economic and social decisions are already being made by these private tyrannies, then what are elections? They're just heavily scripted dramas where the players stick to the script.
You're just debating marginal issues.
Right, because the fundamentals are already cordoned off from any democratic oversight.
This domestic management is absolutely foundational. But what happens when the public doesn't stay passive? When the great beast escapes its confines?
That's when we get to the section on undermining civil liberties. When people start to mobilize and demand real change, the source argues that what emerges is a crisis of democracy.
And that crisis necessitates some, let's say, severe measures from the elite to discipline everybody.
Exactly. And we saw a pretty dramatic example of this proposed discipline right after 9/11 with that leaked Domestic Security Enhancement Act of 2003.
The proposals in that were chilling, just in how far they went to expand state power.
Think about this for a second. The draft would have allowed the government to strip a person of their citizenship for providing material support to a blacklisted organization.
Even if the person didn't know the group was blacklisted.
Even if they had no knowledge whatsoever.
It just removes due process entirely. It allows for secret arrests, massive expansion of surveillance.
And the source uses this really powerful warning from history to frame just how radical those proposed powers were.
The quote from Winston Churchill.
Yes. A striking contrast. Chomsky brings in Churchill, who said that the power of the executive to imprison someone without a charge known to law is, quote, in the highest degree odious and the foundation of all totalitarian government, whether Nazi or communist.
And the claim is that the powers being demanded by the Bush administration went even further than what Churchill was warning against.
It's a profound indictment. And, this contempt for domestic law, it's mirrored perfectly on the global stage, a decades-long contempt for international law.
What are some of the key examples the source points to?
Well, the U.S. position on multilateral efforts is pretty stark. The source notes the U.S. abstained, which acts as a double veto on attempts to ban the militarization of space.
Which is a serious long-term threat to global security.
A massive threat. And the U.S. also just terminated negotiations to prevent biological warfare. The message is pretty clear. We won't accept any restraint that limits U.S. power.
And the most concrete, just unforgettable example of this is the Nicaragua precedent from 1986.
Yeah, this case is so important because it's the proof that the U.S. government will just reject rulings it doesn't like. Nicaragua sued the U.S. in the World Court for admitted terrorist acts.
Like mining their harbors.
Right. And the court ruled in Nicaragua's favor. It condemned the U.S. for unlawful use of force and ordered it to pay reparations.
So what was the official response to being condemned by the highest legal body in the world?
Dismissal. And then they increased the violence. The U.S. just rejected the court's jurisdiction for that case, told them to mind their own business, and immediately escalated the attacks against Nicaragua.
This ties back perfectly to that principle you mentioned earlier, the radical asymmetry.
Precisely. The core doctrine, which is fueled by that Wilsonian idealism, is that we are good, and therefore we're exempt from the standards we apply to everyone else.
And if a state stands in our way, they become evil.
And that justifies everything. Our crimes are just mistakes, or maybe benevolence gone wrong. But any act of defiance against us is judged by the absolute highest, most unforgiving standard.
Which explains the dynamic of this next section, the need to punish independence. It's not just about defeating military enemies, it's about crushing any alternative model.
Yes, what the source calls successful defiance.
This is where it gets really insightful.
It is. Chomsky argues that something like the European social market system, with its strong safety nets, it has to be dispatched to oblivion. And you have to ask why.
It's because it could become a virus that might infect others, meaning it threatens the ideological consensus here at home.
Exactly. You got it. It's not just an economic threat, it's a psychological one.
To the great beast in the U.S.
Exactly. If the American public sees a stable, functional, widely popular system like universal health care working in Europe, it completely refutes the domestic propaganda that those options are politically impossible.
So the threat isn't just to U.S. influence abroad, but to the control of those unaccountable private tyrannies at home.
That's the real threat.
Yeah.
The success of an alternative model is the virus. And the source uses Haiti's history as this sort of foundational example of punishing the virus of liberation.
Haiti's independence from France in 1804, a massive anti-slavery event that instantly terrified the civilized world.
Especially the U.S. The fear was simple.
Huh.
If enslaved people could achieve freedom there, that virus could spread.
So the result was isolation, crippling punishment.
Haiti was forced to pay a huge indemnity to France for the crime of liberation. It crippled their economy for good. And then you fast forward almost 200 years.
To 1990.
Haiti holds its first free election, and the U.S. immediately moves to undermine the result and then supports the military coup that followed. The pattern of punishing independence is just. It's strikingly consistent.
And this strategy, this rejection of diplomacy, this punishment of defiance, it led directly into the planning for the Iraq invasion.
The source shows the administration was just determined to make war inevitable. All these warnings from aid agencies about a potential humanitarian catastrophe were just
Ignored.
completely ignored.
And what really broke any chance for a diplomatic solution, according to the source, it wasn't some sudden crisis, it was an act of defiance.
Precisely. It was the moment Iraq submitted its declaration on armaments to the UN. The feeling in the White House was apparently just rage.
They saw it as an insult.
They saw it as a tin pot dictator was mocking the president.
And at that point, diplomacy was off the table. The psychological need for retribution just took over.
It did. But the source is clear that this foreign crisis strategy is so often manufactured for domestic political gain.
It's the ultimate link between hegemony abroad and control at home. The strategic use of fear.
Go back to the Reagan years. The threat from Nicaragua was completely concocted. Nicaraguans were portrayed as looming on the horizon, only 2 days driving time from Harlingen, Texas, waving their copies of Mein Kampf.
A completely fabricated image.
But necessary to invoke that righteous memory of Churchill standing up to the Nazis. It's a deeply cynical use of history.
And the strategy remains explicit. The source brings up Karl Rove's political strategy.
The classic move of an endangered right-wing oligarchy. You divert mass discontent into fear of crazed Arabs or other demons. It's all for electoral purposes.
So this brings us to the core question in the final part of this. If we know the rhetoric is false and the motivations are self-serving, why does this cycle just keep going?
Chomsky frames it as a problem of unexamined history. He presses the question, why do we persist in our own crimes, either directly or through crucial support for murderous clients?
And the answer, at least partly, is in the deliberate suppression of the facts about our own complicity.
Right. And the East Timor case is just the perfect, painful illustration of that complicity and also of the power of withdrawal.
A power we often ignore.
We do. East Timor suffered a genocide under Indonesian occupation, which was supported for decades by the U.S. and its allies. But when the U.S. finally withdrew its military and economic support, the result was immediate.
What was that result?
The Indonesian military immediately withdrew from the territory. UN peacekeepers were able to enter.
So the takeaway is crystal clear.
It is. There was no need for a massive military intervention. Simply withdrawing American participation and support would have stopped some of the worst crimes of the late 20th century.
Which forces the uncomfortable conclusion that the U.S. wasn't just enabling the crimes, but actively sustaining them.
An incredibly tough thing to face. And shifting gears a bit, this also applies to domestic policy with a global impact, like the U.S. drug war.
The source critiques that framework pretty harshly.
The analysis suggests it serves two main purposes. Domestically, it helps control an ethnically distinct and economically deprived underclass. And internationally, it serves U.S. economic and security interests.
And to challenge the assumptions behind that policy, the source uses a really powerful hypothetical.
Yeah, it asks you, the listener, to just apply the same standard back to the U.S. Imagine how the U.S. would react if Colombia or China started fumigation programs in North Carolina to destroy subsidized tobacco crops.
A lethal product that other countries are then forced to import.
Exactly. That comparison just forces you to reckon with the moral asymmetry we apply to our policies versus others.
So finally, looking forward, what kind of advice does the source offer for breaking this cycle?
It brings in the perspective of some very experienced Israeli security professionals, and they provide a real grounding reality check.
Ami Ayalon, former head of Shabak.
He concluded that anyone who seeks a victory against terror through force alone, without addressing the underlying grievances, they want an unending war.
And Irisagi, former head of military intelligence, came to a similar conclusion about mutual respect.
Sagi said that military force just isn't enough. To achieve mutual survival with the Arabs, he said, one must accept a minimum of respect for Arab society.
And that applies universally.
Absolutely. The only real path forward is an honorable resolution that respects the legitimate rights of the other side, not one that seeks permanent dominance through force.
So what does this all mean for you as you're listening to this? This deep dive reveals a system where global dominance is pursued through force, and it's propped up by a domestic strategy to keep the great beast contained.
And that system relies entirely on a radical moral asymmetry. That's the key challenge here. The main takeaway from all this material is the absolute necessity of adopting the same standards, whether they are evaluating their own political and intellectual elites or those of official enemies.
Which isn't idealism. No, it's just an elementary exercise of rationality and honesty.
That level of honesty is difficult, but, well, critical for survival. And to leave you with the final thought, we go back to the philosopher Bertrand Russell. He contemplated the ultimate cost of all this. He wrote that after ages of evolution produced harmless butterflies, it progressed to generating Neros, Genghis Khans, and Hitlers.
He believed it was a passing nightmare, and that real peace would only return when the Earth becomes again incapable of supporting life.
A chilling projection.
It is. So the question the source leaves us with, the one we all have to consider, is this. What collective action can we take to awaken from this nightmare before nature resolves the problem for us?
That is our challenge for today. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.